And here we are once again on the Andy Alberti show. And sometimes we have things happen in our daily lives that we have to question. And that happened to me today. I was busy doing the breakfast this morning for a group of people for discussion. And after the breakfast, I came home. And before I had left for the show, for the breakfast, I couldn't find my notebook. I looked everywhere. What do they say? I looked high, I looked low, I looked left, I looked right. And it was nowhere to be found. It was nowhere in sight. Well, guess what? I went home after that. I looked again. My wife looked. My son looked. We could not find my notebook. Very valuable because it has things I've talked about in previous shows. Well, at the end of today, I was setting up for a garage sale tomorrow. By the way, if you're listening, I am having a garage sale, 3721 South Unicorn, Friday and Saturday morning. Going to open up at 8 o'clock. So all of you who like to sleep in can sleep in to a degree. So that's kind of the plan here. And just before I got ready to leave for the show, I was standing over a card table and I looked into our living room. And I had been in there a dozen times. I had looked in there a dozen times. There on the floor, next to the chair, was my notebook. I had called people who had driven me around yesterday. Nobody could find it. And there it was. So I'm kind of curious. Do you ever have a time when you've looked right there and it wasn't there? There was a science fiction show a number of years ago in which this fella had discovered, through his investigating scientific talent, that there were little gremlins that every fraction of a second, they had to reconstitute the scene that you were living. And in that, sometimes something that was supposed to be there was missing. And then it would turn up later. And he eventually discovered that it was these gremlins that were doing this. So ever since I saw that show, and these things have happened to me, I look right at it and it's as though my eyes have filled in the carpeting where there was a book. Or those gremlins were there and reading my stuff and then putting it back. I don't know. But if you've ever had that experience of looking for something and looking and looking and looking, and you just can't find it, and suddenly there it is, well, that is one of the things that I think are very important to us as an adults. And it seems like as you get older, I'm not going to say it happens anymore. There was a time in my youth when I was 24 years old, and I had a bottle of bourbon, and I had gone into my garage. It was a one-car garage because I was just starting out in life. And I went out there and I had put little shelves between the studs of the wall in the garage. And I had a bottle of bourbon with me. I was going to have a couple of shots. And lo and behold, that bottle of bourbon was missing. Flat out disappeared. I looked all over that garage. And it wasn't that big a garage. I didn't see it. Now, I don't know if in my brain it was missing or if it was really missing. It was a week later that I came down the steps from the house into the garage, and I looked up, and there it was sitting on one of the shelves I had built. Now, you would think I'd have seen that. No problem. Either I completely missed it, or those gremlins were at work then. Now, I was a young man then. Now, as a senior citizen, I'm having the same effect. Did those guys come back to my place? I don't know. but it does bother me that these things happen. So I'm going to go on to what my show topics are today. And I want to talk a little bit about what I perceive to be some corrupt activity that went on in Nye County. So if you don't know the history of Nye County because you didn't live here 10, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, you can buy a book. And this book is called Nye County Brothel Wars. And it had to do with the chicken ranch and brothels in general and what went on. And during that time, there was a lady, the first woman I know of that ran for sheriff in Nye County. And her name was Joni Wines, W-I-N-E-S. And Joni got elected to be the sheriff. And this book covers what was going on at the time as is written in the book. You know, maybe not everything in the book is 100% accurate. I don't know. I can't prove that. But I'm sure some of it is because I've talked to people who lived here at that time. Anyway, so Joni became the sheriff. And she went after the corruption that was existing at that time in Nye County. And, you know, she did one hell of a job. She publicized what was going on. And she went after the corrupt activities that were going on in Nye County. I mean, the chicken ranch got burned down once. There were people in there doing their jobs. Anyway, if you want, you can go on Amazon and find the book. At least I found it. It was used, and it was $3. The shipping cost me more than the book did. But it was an interesting read about Nye County history. And there was one thing I got out of that book, if I got nothing else. Joni Wines, after being a sheriff, ran for re-election. And she didn't get re-elected. And there's an issue in the book that the author describes as the reason she didn't get re-elected. Now, remember, I told you that Joni Wines was going after the corruption in Nye County as the then sheriff. Well, that is the truth. The reason she didn't get elected was because she was going after the corruption in Nye County and made it public. And from what they had to say in this book, the people who lived in Nye County at the time were concerned that if they got a reputation for all this corruption that was going on, people would stop coming here for tourism. I don't know if that's true or not, but it sounds logical. Anyway, she didn't get reelected. And here she was doing the job she was hired to do. Now you're probably wondering, well, what the hell is he going to talk about now? I want to talk about some of the things that I have seen happen in Nye County that were absolute outright lies, misinformation, and what I consider to be some kind of fraudulent action that nobody ever did anything about. So the first one I want to talk about is one of our county assessors. And her name was Shirley Matson. Now, the history of Shirley Matson was this. She was running for county assessor in the general election several years ago. I think it was 2012, 2010, somewhere in there. And there was an existing county assessor who had also filed to run for re-election. Now, at that time, the economy had taken a dive, and the person and the county was concerned that the budget was too high and they were going to get rid of some employees. They had to figure out not only who could they do without, but which ones were willing to take a retirement plan. So the county came up, I believe I have it here with me today, the Employee Voluntary Separation Plan. The basic crux of this plan was this. There were people who were eligible to retire early if they so desired. And for retiring early, they were going to get a bonus. And these bonuses, should they retire, would be anywhere from $20,000 to $100,000 roughly. And actually, yeah, some people did get $100,000 to retire. And in my thinking, when they came up with this, well, gee, those poor people aren't going to get retirement money, but because we're paying them $100,000 to retire, but they can always get another job. They're still young enough. That wasn't the deal. I found out later that those who took the retirement were also eligible for their retirement benefits. And then they could, and that one of the people who retired, two of them actually, maybe there was three, but at least two, wanted to advise the new assessor, and I'm going to get to how that happened in a minute, wanted to advise the new assessor on how to run the assessor's office. Okay, so this took place when two people filed to run for that office. And that was Sandy Musselman, who was the assessor at the time. Loved Sandy. She was a nice lady to work with. And Shirley Matson, an outsider, but a real estate broker in two states with a lot of experience and knowledge about real estate. And after all, that's what the assessor deals with. A great potential candidate. But all during this time, the county came up with this employee separation plan. 30 people applied, said that they would take retirement. And so the plan was put into action. Now, one of the things that really bothered me at that time, and you as a voter, I want you to think about this. When a person is elected to office, are they entitled to employee benefits, or are they elected officials under state benefits while they're elected? How does that work? Are they actually employees? Well, let me give you an example. When Tony DeMeo was the sheriff, he was an independently elected official as the county sheriff. And Tony made it known in no uncertain terms to the town board that as the sheriff, he did not take direction or orders from anyone. He was the sheriff, and he would decide how any particular situation would be handled. Now, to my way of thinking, Tony, in his explanation, was right on target. So an assessor or a treasurer or whoever else it is, district attorney, does not answer to county commissioners or anyone else, town board, whatever, Valley Electric, the school district. They do their job as required by the state, and they answer to the state. Now, they do work with the county and with the school district, but they are not answerable to the county. So in this time, a woman named Danelle Shamrell was the human resources manager for the county. And she made a determination that an elected official could retire with county benefits and a $100,000 bonus if she so desired while she was in office. Now, you have to realize she wasn't reelected. She was in office and running for reelection or deciding to. And so Sandy, I think if I was Sandy, I would have taken the deal. She got $100,000 to retire, and then she's got her retirement with PERS. By the way, you can see how much people are getting for retirement on the government retirement plan by going online to Transparent Nevada. It's as though it's like a veil has been lifted. It's now transparent. So Transparent Nevada has every single employee paid by the government, how much their salary is and how much their benefits is and what that totals out to. Even the retirees' numbers are there. And if you're going to vote this coming year, you ought to go look at that first. Because when you just do a search for for everybody that works in government. There is one man at the top of the list who will come up. His last name is Zamboni. Now, I'm not coming up with this out of my own goodness of my heart to tell you. This is coming up because of Transparent Nevada's information. And this man is the highest paid government person in Nevada. His salary with benefits is $1,300,000 a year. Now, I don't know what other kind of accoutrements may come with the job, but certainly there are some other things as well. And it isn't as though this individual made that income in 1 year. There are multiple years. If you go on Transparent Nevada, well, you see this man's name and his pay. The highest paid person in government in Nevada, $1,300,000 a year. Okay, so going back now to Shirley Matson running for office as the assessor and Sandy Musselman. Sandy took the bait and she took the 100,000, so she retired. But her name could not be removed from the ballot because when people filed to run for office, there was a cutoff date as to when the people can no longer file, and that's about a 2-week period. And then after that, there's another short period of about 2 weeks where if you have a change of heart and decide not to run, you can remove yourself from the ballot. But after that, you cannot. So that period where you could not remove yourself from the ballot had passed. Well, now you have someone who's retired that's still on the ballot, and you have Shirley Matson, who nobody knows, running for that office with good credentials and apparent integrity. Not that, and I'm not trying to say that Sandy Musselman didn't have integrity. I believe she did. I would have taken the deal. So there was a lot of talk going around at the time. Well, what's the game plan here? What are the commissioners going to do? Some people surmised this scenario. Shirley Matson loses the election. The retiree decides that since she won the election, not only will she get her retirement, but she would now accept the win or not. And if she didn't, then the commissioners would look for someone to become the assessor. That was the thinking that people had at the time. And it's not just me. There was a lot of people, mostly in the Republican Party, because they run everything here. And the bottom line was Shirley Matson won. So that ended that speculation. But it only began to have some really serious effects in Nye County. Now, I want to tell you about something before I get to the rest of that story that ties in with this. And this is a voluntary separation program for, what's the hell the name of that? Minden, Nevada. And when they were going through this separation, I have this thing that I'm not the brightest guy in the world to come up with ideas. I want to see what other people are doing. And if they have a better idea than I can come up with, I'd rather adopt their ideas, especially if it's for the good of the people. So I had contacted the Human Resources Division at Minden. And off the top of my head, I don't recall the name of the lady I talked to, but I want to tell you, she was a wonderful human being, willing to share everything they did. And they had a voluntary separation program. They would never pay anybody more than $20,000 to accept early retirement. That was the maximum. Nobody in their area ever got more than $20,000 to retire. And many got a lot less. So in my conversations with her, I asked her if she could send me a copy of their policy. And I thought, if we have a policy here and the unions have a contract, whatever it all is, I want to see what theirs actually said. And it's very specific. I really liked the policy at Minden, especially the maximum figure. It didn't get into whether somebody's an elected official or not. That's a separate issue, and I think it should be addressed. And the reason I'm bringing up that now is that I took the Minden policy and word for word left it in place because it was accepted and actually in practice in another county. And I just changed the words from Minden to Nye County. And there is the new county policy that I offered the commissioners, and they didn't want to see it. Now, you have commissioners today that are in office. They won't look at this either. I guarantee you that. Don't ask me why. Maybe they don't want to anger the union. And I don't think this should anger the union. I really don't. And in reality, so anyone out there, if you're listening, I want you all to know that Andy Alberti has the voluntary separation plan under the authority of Nye County Board of Commissioners. And I have it all written out. It exists in Minden, so it's not like there's anything legally that would prevent this from being put into place. And I'm bringing this up because you can see the economy exploding because the government is pumping so much money into it to stimulate the economy. I mean, you've got to see it. Everybody got $2,000 to spend. Some spent, some saved, some invested, but everybody got $2,000. You give everybody $2,000 when there's 330 million people in this country. That's a big stimulation factor. I'm stimulated right now just talking about it. Okay, so that is what happened and where we are. So if you would like to see a copy of my proposal directly from the Minden Human Resources Director, I have it. I'd love to share it with a few people, as many as would like to see it. If need be, I can even put it in an email or a website, but I got to hear from somebody that you'd like to have it. Okay, so then Shirley Matson, under the Nye County proposal, became the assessor. Now, I also want to offer an alternate way that I would have handled the situation of not enough money to run the government because of the economy. I would never have paid anybody. They assigned $3 million to buy off these employees so they didn't have to work. I would not have handled it that way. I would have approached the employees as the manager and the commissioners, and I would have said, look, we don't want to let you go. We want to keep you employed. But we can't do that if we don't have more money coming into the county to pay you. Now, either you can take a pay cut and stay employed, or how about we reassign you to a different position temporarily to help us locate companies that would be willing to move to Nye County during this hard times, and you can keep your job. Now, to me, it would make sense during a time of economic downturn that some companies might be considering relocating, like from places in California. And at that time, there were 4 of us who sat down in a conference call from my home here in Peru. Our station manager was there, Anthony Greco was there, and a fellow named Warren Pollock. And I had tracked down a fellow in California who relocated companies who wanted to get out from under the oppressive nature of California taxes and move someplace else. So we had him on the phone, and we're talking to him for about 20 minutes about what kind of companies we look for and that sort of thing. And all of a sudden he said, well, wait a minute. Are you fellas in the government? And we told him that we were citizens looking to help government locate companies here, that we did have an entity, not part of the government, that's supposed to do this, but we didn't think they were doing a good job of it. And he responded with, gee, I'm really sorry, guys, but I only deal with governments directly. And if you're not in the government, I think our conversation is ended unless you can get appointed by your government to represent them. Well, they already had somebody doing that. No comment. For me, anyway, other than my opinion was, eventually the commissioners realized that those people weren't doing the job either. And so they disbanded what was known as Eden, which was the economic development for Esmeralda and Nye County. So that's where I was. I would have wanted to put our employees to work and assigning them what kinds of companies to look for, making contact, encouraging them, and seeing what we could get them to do to locate here. Because when all is said and done, if you have no jobs, you lose your tax base. Because taxes come from purchases, they come from home ownership. You know, people lost their houses during that time. They didn't have enough jobs. There were foreclosures left and right. The school district was down 300 students as a result. And if you lose 300 students, that's only those that went to school. We had, out of 11,000 homes here in Nye County, 3,000 empty homes. And the town of Pahrump, seeing, well, this was kind of a general thing throughout the country, that abandoned homes going into foreclosure and being foreclosed and the people moving out were not properly cared for. So they would have weeds growing up around them. They would become fire hazards. Power was not on. There was no water on. And so different cities were coming up with mechanisms to force whoever took the property over to maintain it. Now, banks were getting a lot of properties back in their name, but they were not maintaining the properties properly. So at that time, Bill Kobarger was the town manager. And Frank Maurizio and I went to Bill Kobarger with a public records request to see how many people actually had paid $100 for a 6 month period and promised to maintain the properties that they had taken over. So I told you there were 3,000 properties, but there was only 600 people in that book. And I'll tell you what, this is how government works. When we gave Bill Kobarger the request, the requirement was he had to respond within 5 days, 5 working days. Now that response could be, I'm sorry guys, I can't get that that quick, but I'll have it for you in 30 days. Whatever it could be, but he had to respond in some way. But he didn't respond. He ignored it. And state law said he's now violating state law. We could have taken him to court and forced him to do it. But instead, we constantly contacted him asking when we were going to get his response. And one day he responded, come on in, guys. I have a book and I'll show you what we got. And we did. He had a form for everyone that had paid $100 to promise to maintain their property while it was foreclosed on. So it did have some effect. Now they've changed the law since then. At that time, the law said, if you fill out a Public Records Act request and you give it to someone, then you have 5 days starting from 12 a.m. the next day, 5 working days for them to respond. And if they don't respond, then you can go to court. But here's the problem with that. You went to court. The only thing you could get would be your money back to go to court if you won. And knowing how government works, these guys take care of each other. I've seen it in the courts. Okay, so they've changed the law since then. Now, here's the new law. You'll love this. You can receive $1,000 if you prevail, if you take them to court. No, I'm sorry. You can't get $1,000. That $1,000 you get will go to the state general fund from the county or the town or whoever you sue. Now, if there's a second recurrence where you sue them and you win, now it's $5,000 that you get to donate to the state general fund. It doesn't go into a special fund to help enforce the Public Records Act. No. It just goes in the general fund so that your elected representatives have a few more of your tax dollars to spend at the state level. Now, I called and asked about that, and they said, oh, well, we would use that to help the Attorney General's office enforcing the Public Records Act. You know what? No. If it's in the general fund, you know what's going to happen. That I was promised will not be happening. It never does. So let's say there's a third infraction. Another $5,000 would go to the state general fund. There was a thing that George Putnam used to say. George used to have a radio and TV show in LA, KLAS. And George always used to say on his show, if you want to know why something's happened politically, follow the money. Now, to my way of thinking, you as the person filing the Public Records Act request and then having to go to court to enforce it and the court agreeing with you, you should be entitled to damages for lost time in your life, for the additional cost, for the publicity of people saying, well, this guy don't know what he's talking about. He's no good. Don't trust him or her. No. Not how this was supposed to. I think you should get a benefit if you prevail. So now that you know those things, I want to get to a couple of things that happened with Shirley Matson. And you have to understand something. Government takes care of its own. And that's true of almost any office. If you're working in government and you got buddies and they do something wrong, they get covered. Happens a lot. But what if you're an outsider gets elected to an office and the people that have to work under you, they don't want to do what you want done. They want to do it their own way. Now, maybe their own way could be right, and that's good for having meetings with your employees. But wait a minute, who decides this? The elected official is the one who decides what needs to be done, when it should be done, how it should be done, and who should do it. That was not the case with Shirley Matson. The employees blocked her at many different levels to prevent her from really managing her office. And you have to realize something here. There are 2 offices in Nye County. Now, we're the 3rd largest county in the country, second between San Bernardino in California and I think it's Cochise County in Arizona. So we're 3rd. Those 2 counties have their county seat in the population center. In Nye County, we have a history of placing the county seat at the center of the population. I mean, isn't the county there to serve the public? So, and just as a touch of brief history, originally the county seat in Nye County was in Ione, I-O-N-E, Ione. And the population there was like 10,000 people because of mining. When the mines petered out, the miners left, and there was virtually no population there. So the county voted, with the approval of the state, to move the county seat from Ione to Belmont. Why Belmont? Because Belmont was a strong mining town and had a large population. But that was the same thing that happened in Belmont. Eventually, the mines petered out, so the miners left, and there was virtually no population there. Even today, I think there's maybe 6 people live in Belmont. So Tonopah had a large population at that time, and they argued that they should move the county seat from Belmont to Tonopah. Now, it would have been cheaper just to encourage some employees to move to Belmont to run the county seat. But no, we are going to take the county seat, move it from Belmont to Tonopah. So they had a vote, and they submitted the results of the vote to the state legislature, who has the power to grant the permission to move the county seat. But the state said no. We will not allow. This was 1902. The county would not move the county seat because they couldn't get permission from the state. So in 1904, there was another vote. That was submitted to the state legislature, and I guess good lobbying from Tonopah, they managed to move the county seat to Tonopah in 2005. That's the story. There was never any theft of documents or any of these stories you hear. They just went over there because they were the new county seat and took the documents to the new county seat, Tonopah. And at that time, Tonopah had a large population, as I understand it, about 10,000 again. So now the population in Tonopah is 2,500 people compared to, 36, 37,000 at least here in Pahrump. Maybe it's time that they should have moved the county seat down here. And I'm not going to get into any more of that today. I just wanted to give you a little history of that. So Shirley Matson and the treasurer and the clerk and the sheriff and the DA all have to have an office in Tonopah. In addition, the school district has to have an office in Tonopah. In addition to that, there were 5 people working in Tonopah for Health and Human Services, as I understand it, for child services, child protective services. 5 people in Tonopah and nobody in Pahrump with a population at that time of 36,000. Nobody ever talked about this. Nobody ever said, how come we got 2 offices? How come we still have a county seat in Tonopah when we got almost 40,000 people living in Pahrump? And there are people who realize we should move the county seat down here. There would be cost savings and there would be better access to information. Now, there are other offices, a couple of others up there, but the people in Tonopah have some concerns, and I can understand what they're saying. But I want to get to the issue with Shirley Matson, because Shirley had to operate 2 offices, and does every other elected official. So once a month, by law, they have to go to Tonopah because that's the county seat. And because Tonopah is the county seat with a population of about 2,500 right now, they have to have a courthouse. The county courthouse is technically in Tonopah. All the county offices, the main offices, are in Tonopah. The school district's main office, I don't care what you think, is in Tonopah. The law mandates it. When you say, well, wait a minute, what's wrong with having Tonopah as the county seat? Nothing if you want to have all your offices up there. And if that's the case, let's take all the offices in Pahrump and ship them up to Tonopah. I want to give you an example of the kind of problems that creates. When Shirley was dealing with the employees, she discovered that the employees in Tonopah were making their own hours, deciding when they felt like working. When she found out, she put a stop to it. It was not very popular. And these employees all have friends working together in that department and in other departments. So they started to make Shirley's life a little miserable. So in doing so, they filed an ethics complaint against Shirley Matson. Now, the county has a policy, an insurance policy. It's called Pool Pact. In other words, a pact between the counties, the small counties, to have insurance to cover employees and elected officials for any perceived lawsuits that come along. I actually have a copy of that in front of me right now. And I'm not going to bore you going through it, but I'm going to tell you what happened. The county has a responsibility And they admit they have this responsibility. The county commissioners, if you ask them, they have a responsibility to cover the first $50,000 at that time of an employee's or elected official if they get sued or have an ethics complaint filed against them. Now, Shirley Matson at the time was not advised that she had this right. So she wound up spending $45,000 of her own money to get a lawyer. She asked the county, when she found out about it, to reimburse her for the money she had to spend for that defense. Because after all, government employees and elected officials, as employees of the county in some fashion, are entitled, and it's their policy to do this. It's in the pool pack policy. Now, the answer we got was after the ethics hearing, they determined that Shirley Matson had an ethics violation, so they fined her $5,000. To me, this is a joke. It was government employees and others in the government, in addition to some private parties, thinking this was an ethics violation. You really had to stretch it to make this violation stick. And we had employees who went down to the hearings in Clark County. That's where the hearings were held. Now, my opinion is, if there's a violation of ethics in Nye County, we shouldn't have to go to another county to be heard. That board should come out here to have the hearing so we could all attend who can. I wanted to attend that hearing and I couldn't go. I had other commitments. But if it had been here, I could have. You know, that's an issue that'll be coming up in this coming election next year, how all this works. But I can tell you this, they really wanted to damage Shirley Matson. And this was how they did it. They refused to reimburse her for that money. And you know what the answer was that they gave? Well, she was guilty. Wait a minute. The money should have been there before the hearing, and maybe if she'd have had a different lawyer, she wouldn't have been guilty. I mean, it all depends on how things are presented. You understand that. You could go to court and be totally innocent, but the way it's presented, the courts may decide you've done something that you shouldn't have done. So that's all I really want to say today about this whole thing with this insurance package, because I want to get to something else. This one's even better. There was a situation where a assessor's office or treasurer from another state contacted Shirley's office. And they had a check that was written against the county assessor's account. And this check was for $3,000. The check was for a dubious reason, according to the filer of the check, and the way it was submitted. And so the other clerk called the assessor's office here to ask about the check. And when Shirley got into it, it was determined that this was a fraudulent check, and this check looked exactly like a county-issued check. It had the indicia, it had the sequencing numbers correct, it had Shirley's name on it that she did not sign. So this company wasn't, this claim came from Massachusetts. And I have a statement here from a witness, and it says, "We first became aware when a call was received by my deputy in Pahrump, Teresa Shirley, last Friday, from a business located in Massachusetts, asking us to verify a check that was sent to her for $3,200. They were kind enough to fax us a copy of the check and cover letter sent with it included. The fraudulent check is clearly not one of ours and typed, something I never do, I always write in longhand." So it goes on to describe some of this. And guess who had this account? According to this letter, she spoke with our bank and had our account frozen and reported it to Deputy Attorney Tim Sutton, who is now the county manager, who said to make a report with the Sheriff's Department following procedure. Included with the statement are printouts of those who have received funds since I took office with my signature requested by the Sheriff's Deputy O'Donnell. I also believe it could be additional harassment directed at me. And so she went on with some other things here. And I actually have a copy of that check. I have a copy that was Xeroxed for me because I wanted to keep a record. And I'm looking at it right now. And that check says Nye County Assessor with the P.O. Box 271, Tonopah, Nevada 89049. And it was to pay to the order of Brian Nassar, Nassar, $3,200. And it has Shirley's name on it. And on the bottom, it just says memo. It says Nevada State Bank, the address, everything is there. And the check number was properly sequenced in the numbering system that the assessor's office used. Now I have to ask you something. How do you suppose, by the way, this was not one check. There are 4 checks that we know about that were submitted and rejected, all to the same person for the same amount, identical, different sequence numbers on the checks. Now, let's just kind of examine this a little bit. Nobody ever investigated. Nobody ever pursued the investigation. It was determined that because the fraudulent checks were caught in time so that money was not taken from the assessor's trust account, that no harm was done. Now, do you really believe that somebody attempts to commit a crime, that there shouldn't be an investigation to $12,000 worth of, actually $12,800 worth of checks that were sent out? And we don't know if there were any more because it was never pursued. They never figured out where it came from, who did it, anything. But there was a curious thing about this. Because of all this harassment that Shirley Matson was getting from people in the assessor's department, there were some real serious questions about were the people that worked at the assessor's office responsible for this attempt to cash these checks? I don't have an answer for that, but I am asking the question. And since Tim Sutton, the current county manager, was the DA on top of this at the time, I'd be curious what his comment would be today as to how this was pursued. Because as I was told, and I've mentioned just a few minutes ago, there was no harm done. No harm done. The attempt to harm was there. Let's say you walk into the bank. Oh, better yet, let's say you walk into the 7-Eleven and you stick it up and you don't get any money because the cash register is locked. So you leave. Is that a crime? Is there any difference between that and the check writing issue? I mean, the check writing issue, they actually had a check that was fraudulent. So there's fraud right there. Do we investigate fraud? Or are we just a DA's office that says, or a sheriff's office that says, there's no harm done. Let's just keep moving on because it's Shirley Matson. We don't care. Too bad for her. I think you really need to think about this. Elections are coming next year. I'm not a fan of incumbent elected officials. I really am not. And the reason I'm not is that incumbent elected officials think they have a career. Now, Shirley didn't want to have a career in politics. She just wanted to go in and do a good job. I think John Prudence, when he got elected, wanted to go in as treasurer and do a good job. And I think these days, maybe there might be some, I'm not going to say secret. Yeah. There might be some secret trust accounts that the treasurer never sees. Now, I don't know if the comptroller sees them. I don't know if the comptroller is capable. Excuse me, I got a little cough this afternoon. I don't know who sees those accounts. I know the public administrator hasn't got an account. And the way the public administrator handles it, if I'm correct here, and I'll try to be, I'm always willing to be corrected because that's the way we get the truth. But I believe that any monies coming into the public administrator's office are deposited with a bank in a bank's trust account, and then expenses are paid out from that. But that's still an account that the treasurer, I do believe, does not see. If you're listening to this show, the next time you see John Prudent, the treasurer, whether it's at the Republican Central Committee meetings or out on the street or shopping, ask him, John, are there any accounts in Nye County that get money that you never see? And here's the kicker. The treasurer, when the treasurer cuts a check, every check by law that the treasurer writes and sends out has to be published once every 3 months. That list is now on a website. Used to be in the newspaper, but it's now on a website. And if you want to know the website, you can ask John Prudent or one of his employees which website it is, how do you get there, and go take a look for yourself. You can see every check that's written. Now, if you're used to looking at checks, you know checks are made out to specific things. And you should look at the explanations in those reports as to what the check is for. Now, once you do that, I'd love to hear back from somebody. What do you see? I know what I saw. And I was really kind of surprised to see, and it's not John Prudent's fault. This goes back many years. As a matter of fact, John is the one who insisted with the commissioners that he would not put in a fake number to make the checking accounts and the finances balanced, that he had to send reports to the state. You can't do that. The county was doing that for 13 years. There was a woman named Susan Paprocki who quit unexpectedly as the county comptroller, whose job it is to analyze and audit finances in all the departments for the county. She's an employee. She left unexpectedly. Joni Eastley took it over for 2 weeks. And after that, they appointed, excuse me, Amy Fanning to be the new treasurer. I'm sorry, the new comptroller. And then she left with her husband, Dave Fanning, and between the two of them, their income was about $300,000 a year. And they quit and left. Would you quit a job where the two of you were bringing in $300,000 a year? No, not me. So you'd have to drag me out with a rope. So here becomes the question now. What are you going to do about this? What are you going to do as a listener to demand integrity in your government? I mean, you are the sole source of money in some ways. You could lose your house. If your house is paid for and you can't pay the property taxes on your property, you could lose your house. And you could lose your house based to false premises. I have to tell you about this one last thing. There was a complaint filed against Shirley Matson because she took a CD that was in a sealed envelope to the post office to mail it. That was in her office, put there by Human Resources. Now, I don't know what was in it, but it was from, there was some legal issues in that CD. What happened was the assessor's office had the postage stamp machine. So you could go down from the different departments, go in there and use the postage machine and run off a whole bunch of postage for mailings, which was the reason that the CD was there for mailing. So there were two employees who accused Shirley Matson of stealing something from the mail in violation of federal law. Big commotion about this. Well, here's the truth and the facts because I investigated it as an investigative reporter. When that mail was in her office, and it should have been secure, if it was that important, then the chain of ownership was lost when it was put in her office and she took it to the post office. Now, was that a violation of federal law under postage rules? No, because it was not given to a mail carrier or taken to the post office. It was put into her office to go to the post office. So she took it. This was a big deal. I want to tell you, folks, if you talk to the post office and ask them about this, I didn't just talk to the local post office. I talked to the federal post office in Arizona, Western region. They assured me they had no interest in mail until the mail carrier or the post office itself receives that piece of mail. Shirley did the right thing, but they wanted to go after her for it. I'm telling you, outsiders who get elected are not looked upon with favor in Nye County unless they're going to play ball. And if you're going to play ball, guess who pays the price? You do. Now, I understand that we're building a $4 million Taj Mahal or whatever for dogs and cats and elephants and parakeets and whatever else they're going to house in there. I'm not sure that that is the right thing to do, because what you don't know is not only is it $4 million, what about the ongoing expense afterwards? And don't tell me there is none. There is going to be. And to me, I just think that it would have been nice to have rescue places to put these animals and maybe have those places enlarged and cooperate so that you look for a dog or a cat or whatever you want, you could find them. And there's been bad stories about some of them that were run. They should never have existed. 100 cats or more, all underfed, undernourished. It's sad stuff. So maybe there's no fraud in Nye County. Maybe we're just one big happy family. I'm not sure about that, though. When the sheriff's department did a raid at Valley Electric, claiming Angela Evers did something illegal, and it turned out after all of that there was nothing illegal, and the people on the board at that time told Angela Evans, well, we're not going to let you go. We're just waiting until this thing runs out, and we're going to bring you back. And then they let her go. So we're going to talk some more about this next week. I want to remind you that tomorrow we have a new show starting with Blue Laker. And the name of his show is Combat Correspondence. And it should be fun. It's going to be Friday at 4 o'clock. I hope you tune in and catch his first show.
4:30.
4:30. Okay, 4:30. There you go. Already, I'm being corrected. Thank God for that. 4:30 on Friday, and tune in. And the show is going to be called Combat Correspondence. Hope you enjoy it. And now my time is out, so I'm out of here.